Delegate Hope, Delegate Orrock,
Present.
Delegate Scott,
Present.
Delegate Waxman,
Present.
Senator Favola,
Here.
Senator Hashmi,
Here.
John Talaris, Amy Laufer, Connor Cummings,
Here.
Gail Brunk. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Okay, colleagues, we're going to move right into our agenda, and the first item is a presentation by Will Egan, and Will is a policy analyst with the Virginia Commission on Youth. The topic is transition process for students with disabilities, and you have some recommendations with that presentation as well.
Correct.
Okay, welcome, Mr. Egan.
Madam Chair, welcome, thank you. So I will go through an abbreviated version, as abbreviated as you would like me, of the presentation that you heard last winter or last fall at the Commission on Youth, and then the recommendations and an update. So this was a study that we conducted during 2022 after a study mandate that the Commission adopted to convene an advisory group to review how students with disabilities are being provided services in the schools, including mental health services, and how they can be better supported as they transition to adulthood. So from the classroom in high school to the adult setting. This is the list of advisory group members we put together for our study. And our study was chaired by Delegate Brewer and Senator Favola. The group met twice over the summer last year, and we heard presentations from agencies including DOE, PTC, and had a discussion of the findings and recommendations that you'll hear today. So following that, staff conducted interviews with stakeholders over the summer and did a site visit to Wilson Workforce Rehabilitation Center. So just to quickly go through some of the identified issues in our study, Virginia law requires that transition planning for career and employment start no later than the age of 14, 1 year prior to 18, the age of adulthood. That requires that parents are informed that you will lose access to the education rights of the education access of your son and daughter's records unless you act. An action would be one of the following, would be to have a power of attorney granted by your son or daughter's student, would be to be appointed a court guardian or be appointed an education representative. Our group also discussed how once a student turns 18 and leaves the high school or education environment, the IEP or the 504 no longer control and no longer act in terms of gaining services for an adult student. So it's important as the advisory group and the commission learn that a transition plan be in place, and we learned that they are a direct indicator of a student's success as well as community engagement and transition planning. So further, we looked at the barriers and what a student faces if transition doesn't occur properly. What it's referred to mainly is the transition cliff. So when a student's in high school, they're wrapped with services through their IEP or 504, but once they graduate high school, if a transition is not properly made, then the student will, quote, fall off the cliff, and they might not be able to access services at the CSB if the parents haven't been set up to help their student be successful or the student has not been informed properly. So the next few slides will go over some of the agencies that we worked with closely on this study. First would be the Department of Education. We specifically focused on how they work to fund 2 disability support programs through VCU, the Center on Transition Innovations, and the Partnership for People with Disabilities. At the local school environment, we've talked about a lot of this already during this presentation, but the role of the local education authority is to help locate children who may have a disability and develop and administer the IEP program. Further, these are the roles of the local schools when helping out a student transition to adulthood. We've covered these already during the presentation. The next agency that we worked closely with during our study was DBHDS. These are some of the services that they offer and particularly two I would like to highlight would be My Life, My Community, Transition to Adulthood. This is particularly a resource to show where community services are available. It's a website and it's a helpful resource to adults and children and families. And then finally would be the Employment First initiative. I believe this was a Senate joint resolution adopted in 2012. And it's the idea that when a student comes in the door at a CSB or interacts with DBHDS, that the first goal is to talk about employment rather than services. Additionally, the study heavily focused on the work done by DARS, the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. DARS services focuses mainly on vocational rehabilitation and pre-ETS counseling. So pre-ETS services start at the age of 14, and they are the training, internship opportunities, and work-based learning that would be available to students who walk in the door at DARS. As recently as 2022, when we did our study, we learned that DARS was servicing less than 12% of eligible students due to the large client base and the small workforce at that agency. So they have a great ability to help students, but we learned that they would need more support staff. DARS's programs, as shown on the screen, include things like Project Search, which is a one-year work internship program, and programs at Wilson Workforce Rehabilitation Center, including PERT and PrEP. Finally, our study, we conducted interviews with families, and as we spoke to families during this process, we learned that there is a communication gap, something I've talked about earlier in this presentation, and that parents don't know enough about the transition process and need more information. So that was just a really quick overview of the study. The full version, of course, is on our website, as well as the report that we adopted last year. And so the following recommendations on the screen were the ones adopted by the Commission on Youth. And what I'll do is I'll go through the status of the recommendation and then anything particularly you may want to follow through with.
Before you start, Mr. Egan, I just want to note that Commission members, we can also embrace some of these recommendations as well, so they would have the clout of two commissions. If that's what we choose, we'll make that decision in November, but, okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We were very lucky, and you'll see that many of them were adopted, but there is a few areas to still look at. So the first recommendation was to require DBHDS, in coordination with DOE, develop and disseminate best practices. This recommendation passed the General Assembly this year, and it was signed by the governor. So reaching out to DBHDS, they have worked with the various stakeholders to put together this document, and they are currently determining the best way to distribute the information. So this next slide talks about the information on the transition process and opportunities available for students with disabilities and professionals alike is overwhelming and confusing, as our finding states. So this recommendation was to put a budget amendment to have DARS work together with the various agencies to ensure that online resources are available. This was a language-only amendment in the recent budget, but it was not adopted by the most recently passed budget.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Auroch.
Why did the commission opt for budget-only language, which then only has the effect of the 2 years, or in this case, the 1 year of the budget being a mandate versus legislation that would then also have it go through the appropriate House and Senate committees for a more thorough vetting? And from my personal experience, as we saw with the first recommendation that was agreed to, they tend to get a better hearing and a better chance of survival, in my experience, if it goes through the committee process rather than be written in the budget. Why? And not just y'all, I'm seeing this with a lot of different commissions where we're opting for budget language rather than true legislation. Was there a reason at the commission level they chose that route, or?
Madam Chair, Delegate Auroch, I believe the thinking at the time was that this could have been done as a request, a letter, we typically do, but there was interest at the commission at the time, I remember, in putting in the force of a budget amendment, so a higher request. I don't exactly remember what the discussion was in terms of budget amendment versus a Section 1 bill, if that's what your question is.
Thank you.
But that's a very good question, and we could decide to do a Section 1 bill. But we have to ensure that this doesn't look like a study. It is a directive to the Department for Aging. Okay.
So yes, I mean, the goal of this,
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, the goal of this recommendation was to find the best place to organize and put out this information. So recommendation 3 is to have DARS work with VCU to develop and disseminate virtual training on transition. This was a letter, and this was geared towards teachers. So to address recommendations 2 and 3, the ones that were the budget amendment not adopted and this request letter, we received information from DARS that they've entered into an agreement with the VCU that includes the development of an online pre-ETS resource hub. So far, they've worked with the Center for Family Involvement to develop a model transition demonstration project. They've also have begun collaborating with PTC to create and provide training for families, and they are working with DOE on strategies to disseminate information regarding pre-ETS. So it's my understanding that a lot of this work has started after our study last year, or just, being ramped up. This recommendation was a letter to DARS to have them continue to work to improve their internship opportunities. And so to address this recommendation, we reached out to DARS again, and they have increased their project search sites on military bases, such as Fort Gregg's. They have also partnered with several community colleges across the Commonwealth to provide career academies, and they continue to support an increase in the Start on Success program. Further, they've reached out to employers by engaging in employment inclusion training. And as you can see on the screen, they've conducted around 956, they've trained 956 individuals this year. So this was a recommendation sent to 3 secretariats, sent directly to the Secretary of Education to have them work together to come up with a V3 type initiative. If you'll remember, that's the initiative to reduce employment among veterans. It's something, for example, the Commission on Youth has on our website. We're trained and we're certified in this manner. And it was a target to look at how the business community could be involved in this. And so a letter was sent by our chair for consideration of this. So this next recommendation or finding was that funding is needed to assist with the transition of students with disabilities. And so this recommendation was a budget amendment for 250 the second year of the biennium. This did not end up in the budget. And as you recall, Senator Favola, that your concern or question was, would it help if this was in the standards of quality? And when we discussed this last year at the commission meeting, the thought was that a pilot or a program where this could be tested out and evaluated throughout the state would be the best effort. But this grant or $250,000 did not make it into the budget. So recommendation 7 was to require that all public high schools identify the person responsible for transition planning. This recommendation was approved by the General Assembly and signed by the governor, and recently DOE has reached out to superintendents to make sure this is happening. Finally, recommendation 8, or not finally, was to support DOE in their use of IDEA funding to develop a state special education transition management position, and the DOE has been able to fund this position. So there is a strong need for better collaboration of services to assist transitioning students with disabilities into adulthood, as we've stated several times during this presentation. One of the entities doing a lot of this work is the Virginia Intercommunity Transition Council. This is a council under DOE. And so this recommendation was to introduce a language-only budget amendment directing DOE to have them meet more regularly. This recommendation did not end up in the final budget, but we did learn this past year, especially from a report that DOE did in December 1st of 2022 as a response to Senator Dunovit and Delegate Carr's recent legislation from 2021, the work they are doing in this capacity. So while that budget amendment did not go through, they are working on such things, including convening a work group of stakeholders to research high-performing states, convening stakeholders to work on technology efforts, and further just disseminating information with the necessary partners. So I think that's everything. I know I went through speedy quick. I think the big things, like you noted, Senator Favola, would be the $250,000 request, and there are possible some budget amendment areas that could be turned into legislation if that was the will of the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. I think my colleagues might have some questions. Did you?
Not a question, I have a motion.
You have a motion. Okay. Okay,
All right, Madam
Delegate
Chairman, given where we are in the budget process with the governor, I'm going to suggest and make as a motion that we would ask the chairman of the commission to write a letter to the governor based on recommendation number 6, to ask if he might include in his coming budget funding a pilot transition coordinator grant program. And I think if we can get it in his budget on the front end, that's obviously the best way to go about it. And I think the commission at this juncture, given that endorsement, may help to sway that in that direction, still giving us the latitude. In November, we should know if it was going to be there or not. We may want to take separate action.
Well, I think that's a great recommendation. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay, there's a second. So again, colleagues, the motion is that I write a letter, and it would be for recommendation 6, asking the governor to include it in his upcoming budget, which will be presented to us in December. So it's really, we had a hefty conversation about this. Coordinators are very important. And at the end of the day, we want to make the transition as seamless as possible for our individuals who have been on IEPs or have, significant developmental challenges. We want them to be able to transition to fruitful employment or an education track, whatever the next journey might be for them. All those in favor of this motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody wish to vote no or abstain? Seeing none, that motion passes unanimously.
Madam Chairman.
Delegate O'Rourke.
I had a second, which would be just a request at this juncture, if we could have for our consideration at the November meeting, potentially recommendation number 2 and number 9 as appropriate. If I understand, some progress may have been made in those areas by the agencies already, but if we could look at in November whether we would want to do legislation at that juncture on number 2 and 9.
I think that would be important. And again, it will give the committee a moment to consider recommendation 2 and 9 because we won't be voting on the commission position until November. So is there a second to that motion? Second. Okay, there's a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, anybody wishing to vote no or abstain? Seeing none, that motion carries unanimously. Colleagues, are there other recommendations from this report that we would like to consider acting on in November? We can put other recommendations before us as well in November. I think my motion would be to ask staff to coordinate with the Commission on Youth on the status of where these recommendations are and any that are still outstanding or have not been included in this biennium, in the budget we just passed or the biennium that we passed in 2022. Maybe you can put before us in November, but we'll have updated information and the Commission can decide whether or not we want to act on them.
Yes.
Delegate Lawfer, or sorry, excuse me, Commissioner Lawfer.
Thank you. Looking at, I'm trying to figure out which recommendation this was. It was to have one person at the high school responsible for the transition discussion. I'm personally going through this, so I am kind of empathetic, and I think if we don't have training for that person, I'm not sure how effective that will be. So maybe it's a budgetary impact, but having some language in there about training for this person to be not just a title, but actual skills behind it as well.
Madam Chair, Ms.
Mr.
Lawfer.
Egan.
So, yes, that was part of recommendation 3 and something we can definitely work with staff to include if that's the will of the commission.
I would like that.
So Commissioner Lawfer, are you suggesting that we incorporate that recommendation for the action by the commission in November?
If that's possible, yes.
Okay.
Maybe it's even just a connection with the DARS person locally, some language in there that gives this person, information that they will probably need.
I will say from a budget perspective, it would be challenging to require one at every school.
Right.
So you may want to think about somebody who is responsible for coordinating at every school.
I'm just afraid that just having a title doesn't necessarily mean
That they will be doing it.
Well, I think they will be doing it, but how effective will it be is the question. So.
Why don't we work on a recommendation that gets to your point about having training for whoever is responsible for doing the coordination at the high schools, because the training can be offered by the state, should be offered by the state, and we can deal with whatever additional support that a coordinator might need. So the motion, if you've all heard that, is to put this before us in November. Motion has been made, and is there a second? And there's a second. Okay. So it's a little different than what the Commission on Youth had, but it's going in the same direction. Okay, colleagues, that will be before us in November.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Delegate Waxman, yes.
If I could just also either ask a question or a favor. It seems like we are putting a lot on the school teachers and local schools, and I think I may know where Commissioner Lawfer's going with that. The experience I've got with some of my local schools are the guidance counselors are overwhelmed, as well as the other staff right now. I didn't know if in the development of this recommendation, somebody had assessed the school's ability to follow through with this new task. I'm just concerned about unfunded mandates at the school when they're already stretched thin.
Well, as I understand, this wouldn't be a mandate. This recommendation would be actually something that the state would have to provide in terms of additional training. But, and we also met with a lot of stakeholders. The schools were at the table when we came up with these recommendations in the Commission on Youth. But Mr. Egan.
And Madam Chair, Delegate Waxman, to that point, the legislation that passed this session really focused on the identification of this person. During the presentation earlier, the work is already being done, but what we heard was there was a gap sometimes in hearing who is going to be my contact person for the transition. That is a well-taken point about building out this person or giving them too many additional responsibilities, and something that I'm sure this commission would consider when looking at legislation forward.
I will just say that was hotly debated for the Commission on Youth, because your point, Delegate Waxman, did come up, and we certainly didn't feel we could be in the position of actually, mandating that one person be solely designated in each high school. So we were trying to get to a wraparound service package. So whoever was designated really did have the ability to do the transition planning. Would you say that's fair, Mr. Egan?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. We can certainly debate it more. Okay. Did I take a vote on that? I think I did, right? I did take a vote. No, you didn't. I didn't, okay. So again, the motion, as we just described it, would be to have this recommendation as discussed. It's a little different than what the Commission on Youth put forth. Have this recommendation in front of the commission November 9th. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody wishing to vote no or oppose? Hearing none. That motion passes unanimously. Yes, Commissioner Lawfer.
The only other question I had is on slide 13 with DAR's capability, and you had said that they're only able to service 12% of the potential clients. Is there any recommendation about increasing their staff? Is that possible to do through this commission, or is it something else?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lawfer, that was not a recommendation we had. Not to say that it's not possible. I just imagine from memory that it was a big price tag, and I don't know if we specifically looked at that, to be quite honest. Yeah.
But Commissioner Lawfer, if you want to offer that as an idea for the commission to contemplate action on in November.
Madam Chair, I think we might be getting a cost number.
Okay.
Or- no.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. Catherine Harrison from the Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. So unfortunately, it's not a simple answer because it goes in with federal match and all sorts of great things. But I do have, I think, good news to share that with the passage of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, it created a new set of services which Will touched on, which were pre-employment transition services. And 15% of our VR dollars that were allocated, including the state match, have to go towards providing those services. So the last couple of years, we've been ramping up and building up. So we anticipate that we are going to be serving more students with disabilities. In addition to the numbers that are talked about eligible students, it includes, all kids with an IEP or who could be eligible for 504. So we are continuing our efforts to try and serve those folks. But, we've had some growing pains as well, trying to figure out how to best staff that as well, too. So
let me just be clear. If we were to add additional dollars for positions, it would have to be all state dollars because you've already allocated some of your federal dollars.
I would need to get back to y'all about that and talk to our finance folks, because I know when you're dealing with the match and maintenance of effort, things start to get into waters that I am not prepared to speak upon. But we could certainly get back to you with some more information if that would be helpful.
Yeah, it might be helpful for you to come forward with information, and I know you don't want to give us a recommendation because that's probably not what you're comfortable doing at the moment, but yeah, more information so we can sort of cogitate on whether
We'd be happy to do that.
What the price tag would be if we were to move forward with more
And Madam
FTEs.
Chair,
Yes, Doug.
if I may, to dovetail on that, and with specificity as to what is achievable, and where I'm headed with that thought is, we're not going to solve it all overnight in this one budget. But if we can come up with a potential plan where that, as a recommendation from us, we're going to request whether it's a 5%, 10%, whatever, an incremental increase to try and address the need. And it may have to do with caveat as federal funds allow or something of that nature. But if you could, as a part of you, when you come back, kind of let us know what would be our first baby step to try and get us moving in the right direction. And then if there's, I don't know if you could give us specifics to part two, but with the understanding that we would like to see a plan whereby we can continue moving the ball down the field.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. That was what it was. Okay. Tag team. Okay, Mr. Egan, is there anything else you would like to present to us or comment on?
That is all, Madam Chair. It's wonderful to present probably the last commission meeting ever in this building.
You're probably correct. And colleagues, I want you to know that we made a special effort to have the meeting here because we wanted to make sure we did have sort of virtual capacity and that we had other tools because the constituencies that would pay attention to our meeting, really, they need other supports. And so we thank the clerks for accommodating
Thank you.
that. Thank you. Okay, the next item is work group recommendations for changing Medicaid programs to remove barriers to independence. And we heard a brief summary of this report before, but nothing as complete, I think, is what we're going to hear now. The presenter is Kelly Pauley, DMAS Eligibility and Enrollment Manager. Ms. Pauley, if you want to go through the recommendations, and these had been seen by lawmakers in the past. The report was issued in 2020, I want to say. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
I have just a little background to remind people where this came from. Thank you for having me. In the 2020 GA session, Senator Vivola introduced Senate Bill 213. And so that was to establish a work group to evaluate the current personal maintenance allowance amount for individuals receiving Medicaid-funded waiver services and the impact for the current personal maintenance allowance amount and other income limits on the ability of Medicaid waiver service recipients to engage in meaningful work. The study, we established a work group, and this study was submitted to the General Assembly in February of 2021. And then in September of 2022, we also presented before the Disability Commission on that report again, talking about the recommendations. In October of last year, we presented to the Disability Commission again with responses to the questions that they had raised at the September meeting. And they wanted to know what other states were doing and what kind of developmental disability waiver, what that wait list looked like. In July, I came back and presented to the Disability Commission on responses to additional questions based on questions that we sent to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. That's our federal partners. And so we had sent questions to them and asked. In August, we were asked to present again on the original options allowed by the CMS guidance. So these were the recommendations. And these numbers are still 2020 numbers. Unless we are asked to do another study, then we would update these numbers. But the first option was to raise the personal maintenance allowance to 200% of the supplemental security income amount. So in 2020, that would have been $1,566, but in 2023, that's $1,828. And I do need to make clear that any time we change, for instance, the personal maintenance allowance, that means that the individual gets to keep more of their money, but that Medicaid, DMAS, gets less of their money. So that money has to come from the state and the federal government, and that's why there's a cost associated. So in 2020, there were approximately 4,000 people who were in the Commonwealth Coordinated Care CCC Plus waiver and 650 in the developmental disability waiver. There's no limit on the number of people who can be in the CCC Plus waiver. It's just based on their need, their developmental needs, and their income. So to raise that personal maintenance allowance and allow them to keep more of their income would have cost at that time $9.5 million, and of course in general funds that would have been $4.8 million. Another option was to raise the personal maintenance allowance to 205% of the SSI amount. And so in 2020, that would have been $1,958, and now it would be I don't think that that's right. I put 1,873, but it's less, and I don't believe that it went down, so I apologize. But at the time, it would have been $14 million, and so the general fund share would have been $7 million. Another option, a more targeted option, is to allow excess housing expenses just in the northern region. So we would raise the personal maintenance allowance, but also allow some additional expenses just for the northern region since the cost of living is higher there. So it's an additional $2 million, general fund $1 million to the cost of raising the allowance. And then the other option would be to raise the allowance and add in additional housing costs for the Northern Virginia group. And so that would be an additional $3 million or $1.5 million of general funds. Another thing that we could do that has a smaller fiscal impact would be to, if people who are in the community need to temporarily go into an institutional setting, so that can be in a nursing facility or in a hospital. Right now, if you go into one of these facilities, then your personal maintenance allowance goes down the next month to only $40. But if we decided to allow for 3 or 6 months them to keep their original personal maintenance allowance so that they could pay their housing costs and everything. That way, if they were able to go back to the community, they would not lose their housing arrangements, and that had a lower fiscal impact. Something that we're currently working on implementing now was a recommendation to include the medically needy spin down for DD waivers. Right now, you can be in a medically needy spin down if you're on the CCC Plus waiver, but not the DD waiver. So we're looking at how to add the spin down option to that. And we went over what the spin down option was before, but essentially it's that if you're over a very low income amount, if you incur medical expenses for that amount, the difference between your income and this income limit, if you incur medical expenses for that amount, then you can be on the waiver. So we're looking at how to implement including the medically needy spin down for the DD waivers. And when I say we, I mean the Department of Medical Assistance. Another option is to extend financial eligibility for Medicaid Works, which is our employment plan for disabled people, to include the waiver in that. So we estimated, if we assumed that 1% maybe of our community living waiver, those are the DD waiver people, wanted to transfer to Medicaid Works, and possibly 2% of one of the other waivers, if they wanted to transfer into Medicaid Works, that it would cost approximately $15.7 million. Right now, that waiver slot is held for 6 months. Since you can't be in both at the same time right now, that waiver slot is held for 6 months while people try out Medicaid Works. And the reason it's held is that since both programs aren't currently allowed to have people in both programs at the same time, they can try it out for 6 months to see if the supports provided by Medicaid Works, which are more limited than the waiver slots, if those services would be enough for them to be able to work and to still maintain their independence and go to work. So we hold it for 6 months now just to see. Now that does keep other people, it sort of puts the waiting list into suspension because other people can't access that slot while these people are trying out Medicaid Works. But we have had a few people successfully transition and leave their waiver slots and move into Medicaid Works and the community CCC Plus waiver instead. I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Ms. Pauley. Yes, Delegate
On
O'Rourke.
that point specifically, though, you just used the key word, you said a few.
Right.
how many more would you anticipate if you extended it for a year? I guess my thought being, right now, why is the 6-month time frame not sufficient to know if it's going to address their needs and be a good fit for them?
I think it is long enough for them to be able to tell whether it will work for them or not. The option is to try to include all the DD waiver individuals in Medicaid Works if they want to be, but there are a lot of logistical concerns with that, because for one thing, we would have to have CMS approval to change the Medicaid Works provisions, and we would have to make changes to the state plan. They don't have the same income limits, so we can, if they're able to and they want to continue, we can transition them. Often it is not enough support for them.
I'm wondering, and I'm just going to wonder out loud, if we provided a few more services under Medicaid Works than what we currently provide, but not quite as much as somebody would receive under the waiver, would more folks then be able to stay on Medicaid Works? That's a value that we all hold dear. I mean, we want folks to be able to actualize their talents to the fullest degree and not be penalized. So I'm wondering if the package is so limited, the service package is so limited under Medicaid Works, it really doesn't make it possible for many people to.
And that may be true. The only, we provide personal care services through Medicaid Works. We don't charge any patient pay for those individuals. So we would have to find out whether that also adds to the fiscal impact if you put them in Medicaid Works. There are currently less than 60 people in Medicaid Works in Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, we would have to inquire with CMS as to whether we could add additional services. But I would think that any additional services that we allowed would be more helpful, be more supportive to people trying to work.
I'm going to ask staff to maybe draft a recommendation for us to consider in November, which would direct staff to look at changing the Medicaid Works support package to enable more individuals to succeed in the Medicaid Works program. I think we want to go through the legislative process on that, and not just a letter, because this will require some investigation.
And DMS has been asked to allow DD waivers to its recipients to also participate in Medicaid Works. And so we're in internal meetings trying to figure out how to do that, but those are some of the stumbling blocks, that they are not equivalent programs. So if we did increase the Medicaid Works services, then that might help with some of those stumbling blocks.
It's probably worth an investigation, but it will take staff time. So I think that should go through the legislative process. And I will just ask, may I have a second to my motion to have staff draft that recommendation for us in November? Okay, it's been seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed or wishing to abstain? Hearing none, that passes unanimously.
Okay.
These are just directions to staff to come forward in November.
Right. Do you have other questions about the recommendations?
Yes, Delegate Waxman.
Regarding the DD waivers, in the most recent budget, did we increase the number of DD waivers? And if so, did the numbers in this presentation need to be updated?
Well, I'm sure that if you put forth a new recommendation, we would have to update our numbers.
Yeah. I'm not sure that the slots have actually been allocated.
I think that the governor said we had used slots this past year. These are just rough numbers based on the past budget.
So, Ms. Pauley, would you please provide staff with the latest information on the DD waiver allocation and whether or not our slots have additional slots have been allocated since the biennium budget passed?
So whether additional slots have been? Okay.
Yeah. I think that's where you're heading. Okay. Oh, yes, Commissioner Lawfer.
Just, to point out, it's very confusing. If you have like maybe a summary of what the triple C DD waiver, what are the differences between the three? I think that might help understand, this a bit better, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's
No,
okay.
it's a good
CCC
question.
Right. The CCC Plus waiver mainly just covers personal care. So if someone needs assistance with bathing or dressing, not medication, but bathing or dressing, that's pretty much what services they get, besides full Medicaid. But the developmental waivers provide other supports, like if you need a coach that would provide hands-on help. I don't know all the services they do, I'm sorry, but we can get you the definition of what the different waivers provide.
Why don't you send that to the entire committee? Commission members, I'm sure, would want to see that, or at least have it in our reference pile.
And I have another question that's not exactly related.
Sure, Commissioner Lawfer, yes.
But I am on the Social Services Board for Albemarle County, and we just had our meeting yesterday. So they were wondering if there's a timeline for, the re-upping of folks with waivers. I know we've had to, reevaluate everybody. And they were wondering if there is an updated timeline of when that has to be completed.
We have to reevaluate everyone's Medicaid coverage by the end of 12 months after the unwinding started. So that started in April. And so we have to finish, we get 12 months and then 2 months to wrap things up. So it'll be, that's July next year, 2024. I think that they also have to be, like their screenings have to be updated to make sure they still need that level of care, but that's under social services, so I'm not sure what their timeline is.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, do you have any further questions or comments? Delegate
Chair.
Auroch?
I have a motion.
Yes, please.
Madam Chairman, I would move that we request the chair to write to the governor requesting that he include in his budget an increase in the PMA to 200% of the supplemental security income amount and continuation as needed of the PMA for individuals who are temporarily in institutional settings.
I think that's great. May I have a second? Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor of me writing this letter signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed or wishing to abstain? Seeing none, that passes unanimously. Okay, that would be very helpful, I think, to folks who are attempting to transition. If there's anything further, if you'd like to add?
No, I'll get this information back to you for you to share with the group.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your patience. I know we've asked quite a few questions, and I understand that you've done yeoman's work trying to address our concerns. I know Mr. Finley is in the audience, and although I do have room for public comment, I believe he wants to probably comment on this topic. So, Mr. Finley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't expect to go so early, but thank you. Delegate Auroch, thank you for making the motion about the PMA. I brought that up 5 years ago as well, so I'm very grateful for that. Thank you very much. The first step in solving a problem is recognizing that you have one. 5 years ago, I said to my representative in Richmond, hey, there's a problem, there's a penalty being imposed on my disabled son who has a Medicaid-funded waiver. A penalty because mom died. My son lives in a group home and receives SSDI instead of SSI because of a Social Security rule that kicks in when parent dies or retires. Given that SSDI can be 4 times as much as SSI, the result is a waiver recipient like my son who is precariously near the Medicaid income cap and can't have a simple, meaningful life job that he was trained to have. For others that exceed the income cap, they lose their Medicaid-funded waiver services entirely. The SSDI income penalty problem has been run up and down the legislative flagpole for 5 years now. Solutions focused on variations of expense disregards. In 2020, like you heard, DMAS studied the issue and recommended a medically needy spend down. In 2022, Delegate Irene Shin proposed a bill that would expand the definition of what qualifies as a medically needy expense. It was then referred to this commission. Last fall, DMAS said they would have to ask CMS about expanding the definition, but a response never came, and that solution quickly faded away. Today, as you heard, DMAS is once again recommending the medically needy spend down, but here's the thing. First, many disabled individuals in Virginia are not medically needy. They are disability needy. Second, the program is administratively impossible to run. Most service providers will not take clients who want to use it. And lastly, it doesn't directly or indirectly address the SSDI income penalty problem. This spring, disability advocates discovered that the feds, who created this problem in the first place, had come up with a solution that states could implement. It's not a backdoor or side door solution, it's a front door solution. It's called an income disregard in contrast to an expense disregard. It came from CMS, not known for being an incubator of innovative thinking, but Virginia could be. The concept is simple. The more SSDI income you disregard and allow in the door, the more SSDI income is converted to patient pay and goes to the state. We advocates spent a week running the numbers, and even I was surprised. Far from wreaking fiscal havoc, as feared by many, the additional federal dollars from increased patient pay would channel $16 million new dollars to Virginia annually. So in solving the SSDI income penalty problem, if Virginia wanted to, it can now begin to fund the waiver wait list or even help with the PMA funding. The information is in the letter that you have that I sent to the commission. By the way, I offered to sit down and share this information with DMAS prior to today. They declined. However, a few folks from DARS that I met a couple weeks ago took me up on my offer. They are very familiar with the SSDI income penalty problem. We're surprised to know that there was a solution. And after reviewing the material that you have, are fully supportive. So perhaps a joint agency study is in order. So as you read my letter with its accompanying material, I hope you will agree that the CMS income disregard for Medicaid waiver recipients is a rare policy win-win-win all around. But most of all, it's a win in protecting the most vulnerable who count on waiver services to stay alive. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the members of the Commission very much.
Thank you, Mr. Finley. I do believe that Ms. Pauley had investigated the income disregard with CMS, and there was a question about how it would be applied across several categories. If you want to respond, you may, and then the Commission will either decide to put forth a study recommendation for us to consider in November or not. Ms. Pauley?
Sure. We did send that question to CMS, and what we were told is that we couldn't disregard the SSDI only for the waiver recipients. If we were going to disregard it, we would have to disregard it for everyone. And the impact of that is very high, and it doesn't equal out. Like, we don't get that additional money back from all the people who aren't receiving waiver services, because nobody else has patient pay, only the people who are getting waiver services. So that's why we didn't put it in our recommendations, just because it wouldn't only impact the group that we're looking at, whereas we would like to be able to do that. They told us that we couldn't. So that's why we didn't recommend that piece.
All right. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. If lawmakers want to go forward with directing DMAS and DARS to do a study on this topic next year, they can put it in as a legislative item. The next topic, we're moving now towards our remote meeting policy.
Madam Chair and members of the commission, I know you all have been considering this policy since June, so I will just give a very brief overview of what it contains. The policy was modeled after the Joint Commission on Healthcare's virtual policy that they have adopted, and we also had it reviewed by our DLS FOIA attorney. The policy allows for, first, the commission to have all virtual meetings under certain circumstances. Those circumstances are enumerated on pages 2 and 3 of the policy. Most notably, any all virtual meeting can only be for the purpose of hearing presentations and information gathering. Second, the policy allows individual members to virtually attend an otherwise in-person meeting under certain circumstances, and those circumstances are listed on page 1. Currently, the policy does not allow any virtual motions or voting. I think there possibly had been some discussion about adding that in. In addition to our proposed policy, we passed out the House. There's an interim legislative meeting policy that the House follows. That would apply to this commission, and it would prevent any of our House members from voting if we were to add that into our policy. So with that, I'll turn it over. I can take any questions and go from there.
Thank you, Hannah. Do you have any questions, colleagues? The goal here was to try to have uniformity in adopting these virtual meeting policies, so each commission is operating under the same policy. Yes, Delegate Scott. Oh, excuse me. Is there a question? Commissioner Cummings?
If we could, when we were reading this, I just wanted to be okay. When we were reading it, I just wanted to be clear so that, like, Connor, who is autistic, if he can't make a meeting because he has different things that go on, and every person with a disability does. So if they can't make a meeting, they can come virtual, but they cannot vote or be part of the quorum. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct. I think that situation would fall under number 1 on the first page. And I think that Connor wouldn't be able to vote, but he could attend any meeting virtually.
Okay, well, he has something to say on that, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, I would like to speak about the proposed exception to the Commission's in-person meeting policy. I certainly do not agree with them. Besides, having distance requirements and not allowing motions, voting, or counting towards the quorum is absolutely not helpful for people with disabilities such as myself. In fact, it means fewer people with disabilities will be able to serve on the commission. There are many reasons why a person with disabilities might need to virtually attend in-person meetings. Some of them are about the person and are physical, mental, and emotional. Sometimes caregivers might not be able to make the trip to Richmond on meeting days. I don't know why these exemptions are being considered today, but I encourage the Commission to take the lead on supporting the bill Delegate Bennett Parker will reintroduce next session. That bill makes rules for social meetings so people with disabilities can always and fully participate. Please and thank you, Connor.
Thank you, Commissioner Cummings, for your response. If Ms. Parker's bill were to pass, then that would override this policy. This policy would only be in effect until legislation passed and that legislation took effect. And usually that's July 1 of the next year. If legislation were to pass in this session, it would take effect July 1, 2024. And that would overrule this policy. So you're only looking then essentially at a short period of time. And also, you would, of course, be able to, under page 1, if you have a medical condition, and I would think that the inability of a personal aide to accompany you would be considered eligible for one of our exemptions here. So you would be able to participate virtually. Other comments, colleagues? We did have this before you at our summer meeting, so you could take time to look at it. And you do have up to 25% of the meetings he could participate virtually if he met the exceptions as outlined here. So
Madam Chairman.
I know lawmaking is challenging and these policies are challenging, but I really do appreciate your comments. Hannah, would you like to add something or? Oh, okay.
Madam Chairman.
Yes.
I have a motion.
Sure, go ahead.
I move that we adopt the policy as presented in June.
Okay. And there's a second, okay.
And Madam Chairman, speaking to the motion?
Yes, Delegate Orrock.
Madam Chairman, as of now, we have no policy. Ergo, we cannot have electronic means of having these meetings. So when we need to do something, while this may not be the perfect answer, it also creates a circumstance where we have to acknowledge the House of Delegates interim legislative meeting policy that does not allow for voting by House members on any of these. And so to make changes towards that end would create a circumstance whereby electronically House members may not be able to vote on an issue, but all other members of the commission could, and therefore negate potential House representation. So I would just suggest we adopt the policy, look at what legislative action may or may not be taken during the 24 session that may modify this. This is consistent with the Joint Commission on Health Care's current practice and most others that I'm aware of. So I would hope the members would support the motion.
Oh, yes, Delegate Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank Commissioner Cummings for his comments and then also Delegate Orrock's comments as well, because I'm kind of stuck in between the two spots. I would like to see the opportunity for folks who find themselves in very difficult situations to be able to participate electronically. But when we're governed by other rules, you know, we must submit to the rules that are before us. And so for that reason, I will be supporting the motion.
I guess we need more voices in the House of Delegates.
Actually, I would.
More diverse.
Chair.
Commissioner Lawfer.
Could you explain again, because I totally agree with, Connor's statement, and I've met so many people with a disability that cannot come here, but their voices would be so critical in these decisions. Could you explain again, I think it was Delegate Bennett Parker, her proposal. Could you explain this to me again?
That's a good question. I have not read Delegate Bennett Parker's proposal. So it didn't pass out of the committee, but yes, Commissioner Cummings.
I can get that sent to everyone, but she went to it last year and it did not go through. But we had, Kona was going to end up voting for it if we made one last change, that it was only for people with disability or their caregivers. But the change didn't get put in the bill when it actually went to vote, so she voted it down. So this year, when we are working on it, we do disability forums, and we have talked to over 65 candidates running for office in Northern Virginia, Prince William, and Loudoun. And this is one of the issues that we talk about. And it has gone across the board that they're all supporting this. So both parties think that this will make sense and understand, like you were saying, how difficult it is and how we are making it so much harder for people's voices to be heard, that their disability, where we're lifting them up in this area, we're kind of making it more difficult for them. And that's not what any of us are trying to do as a purpose. We're just trying to follow rules that have to come. So that's what we're going to be putting out again. So this time, I hope that it passes and then we can fix this situation. But we are talking with everyone. But I can get you how she actually has the whole thing written, and there's candidates, new candidates, whether or not they win or not, that have all said, I will support that bill, I'll be on it, I'll push for it.
And this would be that if you have a disability or your caregiver cannot come, that you can vote
Yes.
and participate on
Yes,
that.
you'll be counted as
Yeah.
the quorum and be able to vote.
Okay.
So if it's, I would ask the chairman's prerogative here, perhaps we can put the content, or a summary of Elizabeth Bennett Parker's bill in our document for action in November. So as a commission, we can, if we wish, endorse her bill, so when it goes forward.
Yes.
Because I do think there's a carve-out that has a legitimate basis for it. So,
Yes.
I think to Delegate Orrock's point, we don't have any policy right now. So I guess I would encourage the commission to adopt this, and then let's move forward during the legislative session and, try to come up with something that's reasonable and more supportive of our members with disabilities. Is that acceptable? Is that enough of a compromise?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor of adopting the policy before us signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed or anybody wishing to abstain on this? Okay, hearing none, this policy is in place. And again, we will have a summary of Elizabeth Bennett Parker's bill before the commission in November for us to act.
Thank you.
Okay. I believe, with the exception of public comment, let me move to public comment. I have 7 members, and they're on Zoom, or 7 individuals who want to participate in this meeting. And I will ask the clerk to open the Zoom platform and call our first speaker. I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson, before you do that, is there anybody who wishes to speak in public comment now who's sitting before us?
And if you are on Zoom and wish to speak to the commission, please raise your hand electronically and I'll move you into the room. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Teresa Champion. I'm here with the Virginia Autism Project. Yesterday, I thought I was going to be the last public speaker in a meeting in this building, and so maybe today I'll win. So I'm here today to, one of the things to address is the Medicaid waiver issue and the income disregard that, sadly did not move forward. Just want to encourage everyone to really take a look at that because, Medicaid waivers are different than people who get Medicaid insurance. And so for someone in a medically needy situation and they have the medically needy spend down, that's, as Mr. Finley says, not always appropriate for people who are developmentally disabled and qualify through their developmental disability. So they don't have those medically needy amounts that they could spend down. So, thus the expense disregard does not work. And the situation is when families have a disabled individual and they are on SSI and the SSDI kicks in, that amount put for the Medicaid waiver puts them above the cap that they're allowed to have income. They're already qualified for the waiver. Doesn't change anything in that way. But they lose all of these supports that they need for group homes, for attendant care, for anything that they need to live independently. And so it's not with reference to the people who receive Medicaid, because people get worried, oh, well, we're disregarding income and then more people are going to, no. This is Medicaid waivers. So other issues that we're working on as a disability community are the woefully inadequate family life education curriculums that are in the schools. What those of us of a certain age refer to as sex ed. So they're not appropriately modified for people with disabilities, individuals with disabilities. And what we're finding is they end up in the judicial system because they have not understood or not been taught how to be safe on the internet, what's appropriate behavior socially, and then they get charged with a crime. We are seeing these numbers increase, so we really need to take a look at how we're modifying that curriculum in Virginia. The Autism Advisory Council needs to be reactivated. There's so much information on the autism population that we do not know. And in Virginia, we don't even know the numbers, the total numbers that we have in our population. And that data needs to be collected. The Behavioral Health Commission is putting a big push forward on metrics for mental health, people who are requiring beds. There's been a big push on the data, and I think the Disability Commission would benefit from pushing for that same amount of data, especially on autism. Another issue that we're needing some help with, and these are things we're going to be looking at, hopefully legislation in the upcoming session. Barrier crimes for families as caregivers. This has become an issue as more and more autistics become involved in the judicial process and receive some sort of criminal charge, and now are the paid caregivers for their minor children, and because of those crimes, can't be the paid caregivers for their minor children who also are disabled. So these barrier crimes are becoming a huge problem, and that needs to be addressed and looked at. And this whole issue of parents as paid caregivers of minor children. DMAS had regulations recently where that was allowed. And that was a part of the flexibilities that were under Appendix K during the COVID emergency. That was extended, and we're very grateful for that, but they put in these restrictions on these parents, such as the EOR. And many of you who don't live in this world don't know these terms, but the employer of record is someone who, if you're in consumer-directed services, looks for the attendance. They're in charge of making sure, the timesheets are filled out properly. And usually that ends up being the other legally responsible individual. In the case of minor children, would be the other parent or someone else like that. And under these regulations that DMAS is now proposing, you can't have the other legally responsible individual as the employer of record. So parents and families are already isolated. They don't have a lot of extended support systems in the community. Now they don't have other people who can be the employer of record and have access to this very sensitive information about their disabled loved one. So that is a restriction that is a hardship for many families, especially out in the hinterlands of Virginia. Also military families who come here without having a very deep support system. So that's a huge problem. And requiring parents to use electronic visit verification. We have a bill that we passed in Virginia where that people who live in the home with the individual does not have to use EVV. I'm still wondering how this regulation doesn't conflict with that. And I will tell you, as a parent, caregiver of an adult child, using that EVV system, I had big signs all over my doors before we had that exception. Don't forget to clock out. Don't forget to, when I walked out the door and had to leave, and it was ridiculous to have me clock in and out when I'm caring for my son. So that if you're allowed, you know what hours you're working, you just, jot that down and you know what hours you're allowed. You shouldn't have to use this electronic visit verification if you live there. So the other last two issues are criminal justice reform. We're going to continue to work on that in this upcoming session because assault is a felony of a law enforcement officer So the families call because they're in crisis and they need help and they call for assistance, and the law enforcement officer gets scratched or his or her toe is stepped on. That's an assault in Virginia, and if it is a conviction, that's a felony and 6 months mandatory in jail. So parents don't end up calling for help, and these individuals should not be charged with these crimes. The last issue is something that the ARC had requested and did not get in the final budget. And I was stunned by this because this makes no sense that this wasn't approved. Combining the caps for assistive technology and environmental accommodations. It passed through both chambers, and it was brought in the past legislative session. Then in this most recent legislative session, it did pass. And I'm not sure what happened to that in the final budget. And I don't know if that has to be new legislation in the upcoming budget to fund it again. I don't know. That would be great clarification to have. But basically, you have $5,000, $5,000, and $5,000 that you can use on these different accommodations that you can have in the home, environmental services or assistive technology. Well, if you're accommodating, making a bathroom able to be accommodations for someone with disabilities, that costs a lot more than $5,000. So the proposal was to take those two fives and make them a 10, and then that's your cap. You couldn't go above that, which made utter complete sense. And I hope that that's something we can work out. So that's a preview of some legislation that the disability and the autism community is going to be looking for. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It would be helpful if you sent us a memo outlining these legislative proposals. So again, I'm going to ask indulgence of the committee if we can put these proposals before us in November.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just say that I serve, along with Senator Hashmi, on the Joint Commission on Technology and Science, and we are being briefed on perhaps internet safety options. And there is a recommendation before that committee that the Department of Ed and the technology chief that works in the Youngkin administration get together with other stakeholders and come up with a model curriculum on internet safety. So it's a complicated issue. At one time there was a bill that actually would require the young person to indicate his or her age, but that really can't be verified. And then if you want information to verify it, then personal information is then being put on the internet. So there aren't a lot of options here, but I wanted you to know that JCOTS is working on it. And in fact, at the October meeting of JCOTS, we're going to hear from the Attorney General's office because in 2021, we did pass an umbrella sort of data safety bill, which allows a consumer to request that their personal data be removed from the internet. And we want to wait and see how that sort of umbrella bill plays out, because certainly information that a child might have on the internet could be removed under that bill. But we're not sure about enforcement. We're not sure how that's being implemented. So JCOTS is going to be briefed by the Attorney General, perhaps somebody from the Virginia PTA Association. And then the third was, I forgot who our third person was going to be to brief us, but we're trying to get an overview of all the different players before us. So I'll keep you posted on what JCOTS is doing, and it might be a topic that you all want to feed into. Delegate Hayes is our chair.
Thank
you. Okay. I guess we'll go to public comment. And colleagues, we have 7 individuals who
Madam
want
Chair,
to.
there were no individuals in the Zoom room who raised their hand.
Oh, did they fall off? Oh, we don't know. Okay, all right. Are there others who want to speak in front of us?
Yes, hello, my name is Jenny Whitborg. Thank you for having us here today. Basically, I wanted to make a request again that the live streaming for the Disability Commission always have interpreters on screen so that anybody at home would be able to see them. We are paying currently for talented interpreters to be here, but nobody at home can see them. And as a PowerPoint presentation comes on screen, the captions are lost. So again, if something is to happen last minute for me, I could always go online and be able to see what's going on with the commission meeting, but I would like to be able to participate with interpreters and with caption. And then also, for example, I had a situation where I had to go to a local hospital and go to have surgery. And it has been an ongoing issue that every time I go to this hospital, it's a fight to get access. It's an ongoing problem. I have colleagues who can kind of go on to that a little bit more. But it's, let's say people need a ramp, and that's accessible to anybody and everyone. But as a deaf person who needs sign language interpreters, it's a constant fight. The ADA is now 33 years old, and we are still having to fight for every basic right. And so I am asking for some consideration and help with that. Yes, hello, my name is Teresa. I live... in Powhatan, Virginia. This is my first time coming to a Disability Commission meeting in person. I have watched online, but I haven't been able to participate because of captions missing, information missing, unable to see the interpreter. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to participate remotely, so I thought I would come in person today to be able to fully participate. So I want to say thank you for providing accessibility through certified interpreters. And I would ask that, I just wanted you to know that the captions that you are being paid for, that they're not as effective. I'm not getting the full message from what's being spoken. To give you an example, the captions being used are artificial intelligence. So there's some automatic speech recognition going on. So while there is an option to have C-print or CART, where it's a person here in the meeting that are typing the messages. This is using artificial intelligence. So there was a caption of social services, but what was displayed was sexual slavery. So just to let you know that is quite confusing of what the topics that are being discussed when the captions are not appropriate or correct.
Thank you. This input's very helpful, and we will try to have an interpreter on Zoom as well. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Long. Excuse my work outfit here.
That's fine.
I am the VAD, Virginia Association of the Deaf president. I am here because I wanted to speak with you directly about the topic of education. That's a big problem where we face a lot of frustration, and it impacts everyone in the deaf community. One thing I want to emphasize is language. Language, and I've lost my train of thought. And English, excuse me, thank you. Sorry, before you had a Delegate Hashmi, Senator Hashmi, excuse me, had a English Language Information Act. So we're speaking about the Lead K bill and changes about to the SELLR ad hoc committee meeting. They chose 3 ASL experts and English experts. They had only one of us as a small minority group to have some representation. We did not have equal representation in the discussion of helping children going forward. So I think an amendment to that Seller bill where we have one of each modality represented. And if I may, this is Michelle again, we'd like to have the language go back instead of having what we had at the top, instead of what we had at the bottom of that bill. That would be much better for us going forward. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for coming down and being with us in person. I think it's always helpful to see the dynamic of a meeting and watch the back and forth. So thank you very much for being here. And thank you for your comments. And we will try to do our best to make these meetings really accessible. So I didn't know that we really didn't have an interpreter online that was available all the time for your questions and comments. So I appreciate that. I guess that concludes our meeting, unless there's another speaker that I'm unaware of. Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, motion made. Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Does anybody object or vote no? Hearing none. Meeting's adjourned.